Hey, this is Guy.
This is John.
Welcome to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like.
Also, below our podcast, Haberman and Middlecoff. Subscribe right now. Talking sports.
Right now, we're talking about the 49ers draft options. They hold the 13th pick and the 31st pick. They don't have a second rounder in the upcoming NFL draft. So we're going to go through all the different things they could do. Everybody wants them to draft a receiver. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people think a receiver makes sense for them, John. We don't.
No, we don't. I think when you trade DeForest Buckner and you get that 13th pick, Kyle Shanahan's proven that he can make not just receivers, but offensive players great. I mean, you have Raheem Mostert that ran for 700 million yards in the playoffs. You turn George Kittle into a superstar. Deebo Samuel in the second round. I think they've proven that they can get star offensive players, or at least turn them into star offensive players later in the draft, or even as undrafted free agents, where at pick 13, you trade DeForest Buckner, you need to get a premium player at a different position, corner, defensive line. I think you need to think like that.
So that's our number one option, and it really is corner or defensive line.
Kinlaw holding a tennis ball there?
I mean, first of all, his shoes are bigger than the football. Look at this guy.
He's a monster guy. If I told you, beside quarterback, that there's not a sexier position to draft than a wide receiver. Because everyone, we got the next Odell. We got the next Randy. We got the next Julio. But why did the Niners make the Super Bowl? They kicked everyone's ass with their defensive line. And they lost to DeForest Buckner, who's been one of their better players. You know, really, even in the group of the guys the Harbaugh era had, I mean, he would have fit right in. He was a premium player. And I think when you look at corner, you got Richard Sherman, who's going in the last year of his contract. Emmanuel Mosey was an undrafted free agent. He was a weak spot, you know, in the Super Bowl. You can get a C.J. Henderson, who I think it's pretty fair to say is, you know, one of the better corner prospects in the last several years. He's the number 2 guy in this year's draft, but mainly because the number 1 guy, Okudah, is viewed as like the next Revis. So if I don't get the next Revis, but if I get a Pro Bowler, I still feel pretty good. I would take either one of these 2 guys if they're there. And if you had to pick between one of the 2 of them, I would probably lean Henderson, given that Kinlaw been banged up a little bit, though he did dominate in the Senior Bowl, and it's hard to pass up on defensive line. It would be a tough decision.
Yeah, it does. It does. I know Matt Maiocco, who covers the 49ers, wrote about this. Kinlaw and defensive tackle seeming to fit with what they've done historically in terms of adding to the line. And like you said, it's hard to deny that's what helped get them to the Super Bowl in large part. So Kinlaw and Henderson, or premium defensive player available there at 13. That's the number 1 best option. So number 2 must be take a receiver. Nope. Number 2, we've got trade back and take a cornerback or best defensive premium playmaker, whatever, provided you're going from 13 to, 20 or 13 to 18 or 13 to 22, somewhere in that range, 5 to 10 spots. We're not talking about giving that pick up and not picking in the first round with that pick.
Yeah, I mean, they have a unique spot in this draft, right? Because they're one of the several teams with multiple first rounders. But then we wouldn't hear from them on Friday, as situated right now, right? They don't have a second round pick. They don't have a third round pick.
Don't have a fourth.
And even if you get up early on Saturday, you won't hear from them in the 4th round. So I think finding a way to trade back while keeping both your first round picks and adding a second, maybe a couple thirds, just adding some picks in that range that they have had a lot of success with, right? Deebo Samuel, Fred Warner, even Ahkello Witherspoon before he got hurt was a starting corner on this team while they were really, I think, up until 8-0, 9-0, he was playing well. I like that, and it gives them cheap labor for a team that's spending a lot of money on a lot of different players. But you're still able to keep the first-round picks. Maybe a C.J. Henderson falls to you. To me, that 31st pick allows you to always land a sweet wide receiver because this draft is so loaded with them that you can maybe draft the defensive lineman even if it's at 20, just because it's hard to get good defensive linemen later in the draft.
Yeah, and really for this one, trade back for 13 is what we're talking about, but it also means you could trade back 13 to whatever 21. Maybe Henderson's there, maybe Fulton, the corner from TCU, is there. And maybe you take a receiver at 31 like you said, or maybe you go back again with 31 into the top of the second round and you take a receiver with that pick. It's not that you have to be in in the first round to take a receiver this year. So now how many of those guys go? I think by the time that 15th spot goes, the top 3 receivers are gone. The question is then, do 3 more guys go before the Niners draft the 31 at receiver? Do 2 guys go, that sort of thing? But I got to think at least at this point, I think we're looking at 6 first-round receivers. What do you think? 5?
Yeah, well, there might not be a wide receiver taken till 12, till the Raiders pick.
Right.
That's what's so you'd say basically from 12 to 32, you're gonna have 6 guys go.
Yeah, because I think 3 are going to go between 12 and I said 15. I think between 11 and 15, 12 and 15 might be 3 in a row.
Here's what works against that theory: is when you have a position of depth, and that's what this receiver draft is. All those teams that are maybe on the fence that like these wide receivers, hell, that might need these wide receivers. I'm not talking about the Raiders and like the Eagles who have to have a wide receiver. I'm talking like the Pats. The Colts don't have one, but just the Dolphins. I mean, just teams that could go, well, we'll just get them in the next round. We need to get our corner, our linebacker, or maybe there's a tackle still on the board. Those guys usually get eaten up, and typically we saw it last year, Guy. Think of all the wide receivers that went in the second round, and then they all had success. Debo, both the Ole Miss guys. And I think sometimes we overvalue, there's going to be 6, 7 wide receivers because it makes sense on paper. But then I think the way these GMs talk themselves out of it, they go, well, I'll get my right tackle at 16 or 15 or 23, and then I'll get Michael Pittman in the second round. And that, to me, pretty consistently happens. I also think it's why, Guy, think how many good wide receivers that are in the NFL right now that are having a ton of success that were drafted after pick between 32 and 60. Happens all the time.
Well, we talked about it on our podcast the other day. The idea that Judy, Lamb, Ruggs are all going to be superstars doesn't work like that. Historically in the NFL draft, it doesn't work like that.
Because you go, listen, I love Deebo Samuel. I love Devontae Adams. I love Juju Smith. But you go, do I want to take that guy at 16 when I really need a wide receiver and I can't trade back? Or do I want to take C.J. Henderson and grab that guy in the second round, or get my right tackle and grab that? I just think pretty consistently happens because the draft is an economic exercise, right? What's the guy's value? Where can I get him? Or where can I get something close to? If I can't get 100% of Jerry Jeudy, can I get 87% of it 20 picks later?
No, it's fair. I mean, the number of guys, first of all, the cut line, there's like a few cut lines at the top, and one of them is after the third guy, Ruggs, right? And then it's Shenault, Rager, I'm going in no particular order, Jefferson, Pittman, Ayuk, Higgins. I mean, the Niners have been connected to Mims. I know we've been watching KJ Hamler. Now I'm probably going too far down the list from Penn State.
But I think you just listed out, I would imagine the majority of those guys go Friday of the draft, and there is.
Well, if that's true, then 6 are not going in the first round. Then we're looking at probably 5.
I would doubt 6. I feel very confident. I think the 3 are a lock, and then you probably have a couple wild. Because to me, once you get past the 3, there might be a team that has Ayuk third on their board, right? That had him above maybe Ruggs. That's where you'll get like, whoa. Justin Jefferson went 20th, and then you don't get another wide receiver because they go, God, we like this guy. We can get him.
All
there.
right, I'm putting the over-under on first-round receivers at 5.5. Let us know in the comments if you're going over or under. Okay, third option for the 49ers. Forget about trading back, and we still haven't gotten to take a receiver at 13. Trade up. Use 13 and 31 or 13 and next year's first or next year's second to move up and get an elite defender. This is my favorite scenario.
Is there any better feeling when you're a fan of a team and you're just like, the Panthers are about to pick, and then that sound, and then Rich or Wingo or whoever, we have a trade, and then it's your team. You're like, yes, we did it. We got aggressive.
And it's just like this year it'll just be like, now to Goodell's basement. He'll be like,
exactly. I would not use 13 and 31 to move up, but if I could use 13, I think for the Niners, if somehow you could get Okudah, or let's say they fell in love with Isaiah Simmons, his versatility, I don't know if you would trade up necessarily for Derek Brown, though I think he'd be a really good player, uh, and move up to get a premium difference making player. Now, would you go 13 next year's one to get up in the top 5 to get something?
Yeah, here's
Probably have to be the
yeah,
corner.
here's the issue though.
But when you could just sit at 13 and take CJ
You
Henderson, that would be.
I don't think 13 and next year's one gets you to 3, right? With where Detroit is, that's not enough. I don't think they could stomach that. 13 and next year's one. If you're not going to, even 13 and 31 might not get you to 3. That's a long way to go.
Well, but wouldn't you say also if you were Detroit, you go, okay, 13 and next year's one. If we're giving them Okudah, how are they not going to be a double-digit win team again?
So that doesn't happen. Miami's not going back. The Chargers aren't going back. So the question, if we're going to do this, is this 13 and what gets you to the Panthers at 7? And you got to
agree next year's one for the Niners is not that great because I think most teams are going to assume they're going to be good.
It's going to be 25 or worse.
Yeah,
and it might be 31 again. So
I think the 7 pick. Now, here would be one. Let's say you really like C.J. Henderson, and you start getting some buzz like he might not make it past the Jags.
At 9,
he might be maybe they would probably be a team, or I would say the Jets.
Arizona's at 8. Is Arizona doing a deal with you?
Yeah, probably not, but yeah, they wouldn't. What if you get word maybe the Raiders love C.J. Henderson? Could you get up a couple spots? I just think you would only do the 13 to 7 if you really felt you were isolated on one guy and you knew or had intel that you felt 90% strongly about he was going to go off the board. A couple years ago, remember the Bears jumped the Giants for Leonard Floyd. Now he's not even on the team anymore, but the Giants kind of couldn't keep their mouth shut how much they loved him. And I think sometimes when that stuff happens, now sometimes, right, it happens against you. Remember the one year the Niners were leaking like, we might take Leonard Floyd. We might trade with the Browns to give him Mitch Trubisky. And the Bears freaked. And that's what's hard about this time of the year. To me, if they're going to trade up, the only reason they would do that if they weren't getting up super high to get Okudah would be they didn't think the guy that they were in love with was going to make it to them, right? Those picks 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that range would go. Because I think if you're the Jets, you could easily, like, if you and the Raiders like the same guy, let's say the Raiders were dead set on taking you knew they were going to take a wide receiver at 19. They were going to use 12 on the guy you wanted, C.J. Henderson. Let's say the Niners were like, listen, we just think the more front 7 guys, Kenneth Murray or Patrick Queen or someone like that, you just like the Raiders are going to take this guy there. Maybe you could do a deal with the Jets to just move back 2 spots because they're not going to lose out on if a tackle's still there. He'll still be there at 13, and the Raiders would just then have to take the wide receiver instead or something, right?
But it's next year's pick you're giving them.
Well, maybe to go from 13 to 11, it could be like, we'll give you 13 and next year's 3.
Yeah.
Right? Or something like that.
Option 4 for the Niners, take a wideout if you love them. Let's look here. This is their wide receiver group from last year. These are their leading receivers. Obviously, Emmanuel Sanders is gone. When we did our rewatch Ham Classic of the Niners-Saints game from last year, Charles Davis, now, by the way, almost a 1A himself. He's moved up to CBS's number 2 crew. He said Debo's a 1A. George Kittle clearly is a 1, whether we want to argue about Debo. And someone tweeted at us on Tuesday the other day about Kendrick Bourne. We really like Kendrick Bourne. So there's not a lot of reason here. They don't need a number 1 receiver. It makes sense for them to get that number 1 receiver, John, with the pick. If the pick they get when they trade 31 back, or if they love a guy at 31, we have this as the 4th option for the Niners, taking a receiver at 13. But
couldn't you look at this best case scenario? You go, well, the guy at the top is the best player at his position. So you have a superstar in George Kittle. Sanders is gone. Wouldn't you say Debo is like, could he be a Devontae, a Juju, like just a star? Maybe not a all-time a Julio, like a Antonio Brown, but just a legitimate, maybe not 1A, but like a 1B. If you could get him another sweet guy with him, you're in pretty good shape. And my argument is they already have George Kittle. Like, you got George Kittle and Debo Samuel. You just got to add a solid piece. I would say this about Kendrick Bourne. I think ideally he's like a 3/4. You know, you like him in
But
that
he
range.
is.
Good special teams guy. He's a dress on game day for the a team that won
Guy
the
you
NFC.
can trust.
So, yeah.
But,
well, he
but
drops
he
some
makes
balls
some big
too.
catches.
Yeah, he does.
Look, this is their draft history when we talk about the Niners. This is not littered with, in 3 years under Shanahan and Lynch, they take big guys first. That's what they've done.
Do you put any stock into what I've been told, and it makes sense? They draft Jalen Hurd last year really high in the 3rd round. Now, he looks sweet. He played a preseason game, trucked the guy at the goal line, scored a touchdown. Then he broke his back. So Dante Pettis, at this point in time, it's hard to depend on him at all, right? How much of 100, if 100's the pie, like you really believe in these guys, where are they at in the pie chart, those two guys? Pettis lower than Hurd, because at least
First
Hurd
of all,
just
any Niner fan, even though bulky has nothing to do with this, is just too scarred to put much stock in a guy with a broken back, Hurd, right? And Pettis, some people would argue there's some good tape out there from 2 years ago, but it should have been better last year. I don't know what happened.
Well, the coach doesn't like him, right? As a player right now. He just doesn't play him.
So, yeah. So, I think –
what about Trent Taylor? Look good, always hurt.
Marquise Goodwin, did you say that?
I don't count him.
What I'm looking at here is they're taking a receiver. They don't have a 2nd-round pick, but they are primed to use 31, move back into the 2nd round, take a receiver there. That's where they get their receiver.
Yeah.
So
I think so. Boom. If we just look roster construction, you go Deebo Samuel.
It's a lot of receivers.
Whoever they draft in the top 50. You got Kendrick Bourne. That's 3. I think right away, if Jalen Hurd's healthy, he'll make the team. Then you're not looking at many spots open, right? I mean, it's for a team that quote unquote has a wide receiver weakness. They're 1 draft pick away from all of a sudden being like, God, just got 1 spot.
Holla at us in the comments.
See
Let us
ya.
know what you think about these Niners options.